Hi everyone. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna talk you through a research project that I started, I think maybe 3, 4 years ago, called Africa Designers Utopia. And this research project basically looks at unauthored or anonymously designed objects across West Africa. But I'm kicking things off in Lagos first. But I would also then talk to you on what kind of birthed the research project, and how it's some of the findings have been used within the studio as well. So with most of my talks, I like to start with 3 facts about myself. That's never read in the bio, and the first one I'd say is like I'm an extreme introvert. So if you see me kind of closing my eyes or looking this way, it's because I tend to not want to give presentations in general. Um, I'm a maker at heart, as it was said earlier. I started making in Lagos actually at the age of 13. Before I stumbled onto design, I was making with welders in Mende after school, or during holidays, summer holidays. So it's something that has kind of guided my career path currently. And of course, I mean, I wouldn't be practicing or doing what I do without being a design lover. But I think for this talk as well, I have to emphasize on the fact that, in my own humble opinion, design doesn't really have a hierarchy. It can start from grassroots level or even up to something that's probably high end. Of course, the contrast of these images I would also explain. Later on, you'll probably get it a lot more as the presentation goes on. But this is a calculator designed by a German designer called Dieter Rams. And this is one of the image on the right is an image of an Okrika setup that we all see every day. And in my opinion, extremely well designed, used from produced with off-cuts or recycled wood. So yeah, as mentioned, Africa Design is Utopia. And why did I start this? Um, I studied industrial design at the University of Leeds in England, and after while I was there, I stayed in England for a year, and I was working on designing medical devices for the National Health Service. When I was coming to back to Lagos, which I really wanted to, a lot of my peers or people around me would always say, "Yeah, contemporary design doesn't exist in Africa. Why would you go back there? There's no one really practicing anything. There are no design studios. How are you going to produce things or mass produce?" And for me, it came off as huge fear. And of course, I had to come back like every Nigerian student. My visa had expired, and I was like, I have no choice. And I have to kind of figure out a way to make it work. So because of this, a lot of the times, even though I was working for other people, I would always ask myself, what is good design? What does good design entail in the context of Nigeria, or even in the context of West Africa? So you're gonna hear me say context, ethnography, and empathy a lot um, at this talk. And the reason is it's the core to how I kind of practice design, and has been the anchor that I lean on when it comes to producing work that comes out of the studio. So for me, context in itself is just consideration. It's making sure to understand the context from a human standpoint, so considering the human, considering the material, and also considering the geographical location. I think when it comes to design in general, geographical location matters because of availability and also consideration to sustainability as well. I'd say empathy again. I think when you're designing or when you're creating an object, it's important to kind of consider all the stakeholders within the production of an object. So even not just the end user from functionality, but even the maker, for example. So how do you approach the maker with an idea? How are you considerate to the production or manufacturing process that's readily available? And how does that kind of knowledge exchange dictate the output of the final design? And of course, practicing it throughout the design process. I think this one's quite tricky when it comes to ethnography and culture. I don't know if anyone knows IDEO here, design firm. Okay, I'm gonna throw some shade to IDEO, or maybe not. But for me, I think when it comes to design, the cultural aspect is one of the most important cornerstone of the output. I think you have to kind of understand the context of the culture, dive into the culture and consider that and understand how people kind of, for example, if you're going to design a chair in Japan, how do people sit? Yes, they sit low to the ground, but what are the other things and the other aspects that's also considered while designing? So, of course, when it comes to ethnography, not just carrying out research or around culture within the human, but also culture within making, culture within how people are going to take in new information and new design. For me, this is extremely important within the studio and how we kind of design. Humility is, in our opinion, the cornerstone of good design. And this is something that we try to consider when we're working with artisans, to understand that these guys, even though some people might see them as not trained officially, but how do we sort of allow their knowledge to guide what's the output or what the final product kind of looks like? And again, not just the artisans, but humility, again, to the material. So from a material context, understanding the properties of the material, of course, the geographical location of the material as well within the design process. So I think on your way out, you're going to be handed over this Venn diagram. And this Venn diagram was actually, I think, adapted maybe 3-4 years ago by myself within the studio. And it kind of guides the output when it comes to commercial work that we work around within the design studio. So, as I mentioned, I was trained in England as a designer, and then moving back to Lagos, there was a lot that I really had to unlearn, in my own opinion. I think the way design is practiced in West Africa had to be different from the way design was practiced in Europe. For me, the constraints felt like blessings, and I saw a great deal of opportunity when it comes to production, but also knowledge and new forms that were being dictated by the constraints that were around the city. For me, the beauty of Lagos is that there's design actually everywhere. So this is a very good example of, in my own opinion, really good design. I know I can see some people like grinning like, oh, really? But I think if you're going to put a product on a pedestal or even analyze it to see and question around what design is, this product in itself kind of speaks to what it is. It's functional, it's affordable, it's economically viable, so it creates opportunities for people. And it kind of looks good, in my own opinion. So the research project, Africa Designers Utopia, is basically looking at some of these objects that we don't see as design and creating an archive. And eventually the idea would be that students would it would be open source, and students will be able to lean into this archive to kind of get inspiration around form, functionality, and readily available materials within the ecosystem. And also to also understand why these materials exist. So again, looking at the Venn diagram and analyzing it and saying, okay, is good design around us in Lagos? And saying, yes, it is, because this design kind of touches every aspect of what we kind of think what good design is. It's empathic, it has social connectivity, and it's also functional. Another good example is Meroa Cart. Again, readily available materials, recycled materials. It's used, I mean, everyone sees it here and there. But believe it or not, some hospitals, of course, rely on this technology to be able to get water. Even unfortunately, some restaurants rely on this to be able to get water to wash their dishes. So I think it's something that we can kind of learn from, and I'll show you how we've leaned on it within the studio to create viable solutions as well. So this is a good example. So I'm gonna stand up now, so I can see the screen. This is a good example of how we kind of approached something that was readily available to inspire a hand washing station that was made for during COVID. While COVID was happening, I was actually in Rwanda with a lot of people from my studio working for consulting for an architectural firm, and we had to. The trip was cut short, and then we had to return to Lagos. And one of the things that happened was that there was no work coming to the studio. Like all our clients had, of course, it was COVID. All our clients had kind of backed out of all their projects. A lot of the artisans who I've worked with, who I've also known from a very young age, were reaching out to me to say, oh, look, there's no work. Like, what are we going to do? How do I feed my family, etc.? And I started speaking to a few friends I knew who were health practitioners, so some doctors, some nurses, etc. I was like, oh, what can we actually do from a design perspective to kind of give back to the community and create something that's, again, open source that anybody can make, and something that people would kind of genuinely need or use within the healthcare system. So after talking to a lot of doctors, nurses, etc., of course, everyone was designing a hand washing station. And they were like, oh, we need a hand washing station, but we need one that can be made in Nigeria. So what happened was I reached out to all the artisans that we had collaborated with in the past and designed around their manufacturing and production process. And for anthropometric data, we dived deep into a lot of the healthcare research archives within the Ministry of Health as well. Again, this is another good example of how some of these findings have kind of inspired things that have come out of the studio. The shelf in the middle is called the M2 shelf, and truth be told, it was actually commissioned by a client who wanted a shelf in their gallery. I don't know if you guys have been to Tiwani. It's right at the entrance. And while the commission came, I was actually neck deep into the research project for Africa Designers UTOPIA. Just kicked off. And I remember being at the studio and having conversations and sketching around how this in itself could actually inform what the output would look like. So again, the M2 shelf. All of this I'll dive into when I speak to maybe Femi after this conversation. I not only have 20 minutes, so I'm speeding through. Sorry. So I'm going to show you now, I think, the most successful product that has come out of the studio, which is the LM stool. And this, again, kind of from a different perspective of seeing Lagos in itself as a utopia for production or even design, maybe not production, but design in itself, is how I kind of stumbled onto the output of this product. The LM stool was the first product I designed at the studio. And how it came about was me going to I don't know if anyone knows Guinness Road in Ikeja. Anyone? Okay, yeah, cool. So I went to Guinness Road, and I had driven there, and I ran out of petrol, and I was still working at Techno, but I think I had spent all my salary on a different prototype. So I parked my car in the corner, and then started walking down the street and knocking on people's door. I think Meccano is like around the corner. There's another company called Tranos around the corner, a few other companies. And I was like, oh, if it's cool, I'd like to walk through your production, your factory, just to see what you guys do. A few people shut their doors at me, but then one person opened up, which was Tranos. So Tranos is an indigenous production company, but they make generator casings in Guinness Road. So after walking into the factory, I asked them, oh, is it okay if I actually design a product? I didn't even say what it was or what I would do or what the approach was. And the first thing they told me was like, look, we don't deal with designers. The reason is because every time they come, they try to dictate, or they ask us to bring new machinery, or figure out a way for a different approach within what they already have. So what I did was I said, look, as a designer, what I'm going to do is design around your production and assembly line. I won't change a thing. I would just create a form after investigating your what's readily available. So I think I was lucky because for 2 days they let me in. So I came in the first day, walked around, spoke to the engineers, figured out what it is that they had readily available when it comes to machinery. And then the second day I came back with a sketch. Again, they make generator casing, so something similar like this, where they would just do the housing of the generators. The engines will be shipped in to Lagos. So after all that conversation and yibby-yabbing, the LM stool was born because basically, again, I designed around the production and manufacturing process and assembly line. It's interesting because what I wanted to design was a chair, but a stool came out. And in my opinion, at first time I saw it, I thought it was, I thought it was ugly. I thought it was actually ugly, and I thought it's supposed to be a stool, but has no legs. How is this gonna work? Again, it also has sharp edges. I don't know if you can see like the feet. It's like, how does this fit into someone's home? But what I eventually did was I tried to sell the first one. So I took it to a house party, opened the boot of my car, and asked anyone if they were going to buy a stool, and I think I sold 2 that night. And that's how I realized that, okay, there's something here. And I think now we've gone on to sell about 350 around the world. Which is something incredible. So for me, I think overall what I'm really trying to say is when it comes to design, especially in Nigeria or Lagos, or maybe even in West Africa, there's actually an edge that we have that we don't realize, which is that design is around us. People are making things every single day. And in other parts of the world, like Europe, etc., and all of that, they're gatekeepers to what design or who designers can be, or how far they can go. But in general, we're actually in a utopia where we have factories, we have artisans, we have raw materials that we can kind of design around. The finishes might be different, the feeling might be different, but there's more here than even outside. So, thank you.